Alright, so a while back I went on a trip with 3 of my best friends to Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra by train, with no car. Here's the story. So a couple things you may want to know. That is me, a random person with a love for travelling in trains. This is Aaron, a social media expert, extrovert and bus enthusiast. This is Enoch, a photographer and somewhat talkative friend. And this is Banjo, who's, well, just Banjo doing what he does best. This is the Reddit post of our trip, which was a pain to book. So our trip started off on the 17th of September by the coach terminal at Roma Street in Brisbane, with all of us meeting there to catch the XPT Link bus to Casino, which, yes, is a town in New South Wales, some 228 kilometers south. The bus trip had some nice scenery as we went across the Great Dividing Range, with a beautiful sunset to top it off as we approached our destination, Casino, which is apparently the beef capital. I'm not too sure about that one. We had some time, so Enoch and I got some drone shots and charged our electronics, while Banjo and Aaron went to go get something to eat nearby and sort of almost missed the train. The journey from Casino to Sydney is about 757 kilometers on a 12-hour train ride, which for some reason we were all excited for. I mean, it was sort of fun. The seats were comfy enough to get some sleep before waking up to some beautiful views of an emerging dawn as we eventually arrived into Sydney. I really like the old concourse design here, if I'm being honest. We caught some trams around the city to go to the quay and caught a boat with lovely views of the Harbour Bridge and Opera House, which was definitely a highlight considering it had been a long time since I had been travelling long distance, like to Sydney. But since we have all been in Australia for long enough, we went on some less touristy routes around Sydney, catching the trains, buses and metros to some outer suburbs, like the very long new metro tunnel between Chatswood and Tallawong, which I managed to get some cool pictures in. Even though it was around 40 degrees Celsius, we somehow managed to survive in the sun while getting some drone shots of this station in the west. This was our first day in Sydney in a nutshell before we caught our next train off to Melbourne. I wasn't planning on making a video out of this, so the footage isn't the best and my voice isn't the most entertaining, but I guess you'll have to deal with it. But here's the entire train as I walk from the back to the front. The distance to Melbourne is about 866 kilometers and takes around 12 hours. However, there was a bloody 2-hour delay. So we arrived well into the morning at Southern Cross train station. Oh, and if you were wondering how we kept all of our electronics charged, since we weren't using any hotels, this is the inconvenient method which we used multiple times. We spent the day in Melbourne having a blast. Since it was my first ever time in Melbourne, I tried to get the most out of it with my few hours of sleep. So I got to see the biggest tram network in the world and went to a place called Pakenham in the southeast, where we could see a new viaduct for the trains being built. But honestly, I like Melbourne because it's always moving and people can be unique and extravagant with no societal consequences. Flinders Street Station is my favourite station though, with the beautiful old station shining in the light. And then of course in the evening we went to a random suburb again and train station for no reason and took some pictures of the sunset on the train. I'd say that the first day in Melbourne was an eventful one, but the next one was more than I would ever expect. It was now time to go to Canberra, and it was a 670 kilometer journey awaiting us to Goulburn for our coach connection. However, on the train, since we were under 18, even though my voice may not sound like it, we got threatened by the staff on the train that they would call the police if our parents didn't pick us up from Goulburn. We were, of course, absolutely terrified since it would jeopardize our entire trip, so we had to discuss over some options for us at Goulburn before the guard came over to say that luckily the manager was fine with us travelling like this, as long as we had parents' approval. We were so relieved about it, and from that point on, it seemed that everyone on the New South Wales Trainlink team started to know us, which I found hilarious. But anyways, in Goulburn, we saw the sunrise in all its glory over the small town in the middle of nowhere and caught our bus to Canberra. Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, is a small city when you think about it being the capital of a massive country by size, with only around 400,000 people. The temperature here was cooler and everything was quieter and more organised. This time, since it was Enoch's first time in Canberra, we went to the Royal Australian Mint and had some lunch in the city centre. Then we got to see Parliament House, and don't ask what Banjo's doing, it's nothing suspicious. And here's a photo of me by Parliament House as well. It had some nice views from the top, and while we were travelling back to the city centre, we noticed a bunch of rabbits just vibing in the middle of a roundabout. Since our bus, for some reason, to Canberra train station didn't show up, we thought it had crashed because it looked like that on the track which we were using. So we had to unfortunately use an Uber to get to the Canberra train station, but we just about made it in time for the train. The scenery after leaving Canberra was so good that I made a compilation of some parts of going towards Sydney, or Campbelltown in this case, and I'll show them here. So now is a good time to speak about how much I spent for the trip. It was a very budget-friendly trip, with the entire trip including everything for over a week, and a plane flight being around 630 Australian dollar dues. About $150 was spent on regional land transport, 170 on flights, and around 310 on everything else. So why would I book a flight when I could just take a train back? Well, because I felt like it and I wanted to spend an extra day in Melbourne instead of Sydney, since I'd been there less, and fly back home quickly. But anyways, we arrived late at night in Campbelltown, which is just southwest of Sydney, and had a bit of a relaxing time because of the 2-hour delays again. And we were already starting to go insane at this point. I had no idea why I recorded this, but I guess I wanted a video of Benjo with an energy drink, which he's always obsessed with, but whatever, we weren't in the best condition. We had some very green scenery coming into Melbourne, which was not the case a few months later when I went on the same route, which you may see in another video I'll hopefully be making soon. But yeah, this day we went to get a Bendigo Bank in Bendigo. Sorry about that. And then to Echuca and walked to the Victoria-New South Wales border near the Murray River. Got some good photos by the Murray Bridge, and then dipped back to Echuca and back down towards Melbourne. There were these cool looking flowers along the train track on the way back to Melbourne, which I never knew existed, and enjoyed some more of the nice green flat scenery in the rural areas of Victoria. But then, in the middle of nowhere, about 70 kilometres north of Melbourne, an incident unfortunately occurred, which changed the trajectory for the rest of our trip.
Delay. Driver cannot drive anymore, so they're looking for a replacement driver.
Yeah, so apparently, our driver decided he didn't want to drive anymore. And we are now stranded 71 kilometers away from Melbourne. And our connection is in just over an hour.
An hour 40 minutes.
An hour 40 minutes, and this train's already running like 34 minutes late.
So it's about 60
minutes late now, yeah.
So because of this, we missed our train to Sydney and had to find some accommodation for the night in Melbourne, but it was quite difficult as we were under 18, so we had to talk to the police about it and managed to get some accommodation with our parents' help online. This was the view from the apartment when we got there at around 1 AM. I thought that this effect was quite cool, and we got a really good night's rest this time with a nice morning view from the apartment. This was the day the iPhone 15 came out, into major retailers as well, which was cool, so we checked that out, but most of the time we were just exploring the suburbs and booking tickets for our bus to Sydney and back. I remember also enjoying this HSB halal snack pack in the city and the outside of the State Library of Victoria, which we were all exploring throughout the night while we waited for our train to arrive. So we actually caught the train to Albury and then a bus from there to Sydney because of track maintenance, which was unfortunate. However, it was definitely fun getting a coffee at 3 AM in a small town called Yass. I don't know, it's something about those calm vibes that was relaxing. The morning was very refreshing and we saw some hot air balloons somewhere a bit west of Campbelltown, but we all got to Sydney with around 2 or 3 hours of sleep on the bus and somehow managed to make it all the way to Katoomba and make the most out of it, even with our sleep-deprived self. It had of course been a while since I'd been there, so I found the views very pretty and unique, although there were a lot of tourists in the area. That was basically the entire day trip before we went by bus back to Melbourne with a bit more sleep this time. This time we went around to Geelong and even further east from Geelong towards a town called Queenscliff to a heritage rail ride before getting some more drone shots of course and exploring the Bay Area on our last day in Victoria. In Melbourne, Enoch and I split off from Aaron and Banjo because they were going back to Brisbane with some tight train connections while we were taking a plane trip, which unfortunately was fully booked by the time of the incident, so we couldn't get them onto the plane. So by this time you may be thinking we were all exhausted from this trip, which don't get me wrong, we totally were, but a couple of days later I went to Helidon and some other places for absolutely no reason. I don't know, I somehow didn't get exhausted. I just love traveling. If you made it this far, thank you so much for enduring through my monotonic voice, and thank you so much for watching, and maybe like and subscribe. Hopefully I'll improve my quality over time, and thank you so much.